Folks, big news out of the Federal Reserve. Fed Chair Jerome Powell announced they now don't see a recession. Really? For nearly more than a year, all we have heard from economists, the Federal Reserve, impending recession. Companies begin laying off people, slashing jobs, pulling back on all sorts of things. Now we see not a recession. Man, I wish my man, Dr. Bill Spriggs, was still alive to be with us. He kept telling us, along with other black economists, not to believe this nonsense. We kept seeing jobs reports come out. We kept seeing the economy do well. And all these folks who were doom and gloom, that's what they all predicted because Republicans were all saying that. Niambi, this is a perfect example of why people, we always say economists are sort of like, meteorologists. They can get the stuff wrong and still keep their damn jobs.
Absolutely. And I will say Dr. Spriggs is sorely missed because he was a great colleague and an amazing economist. But listen, I think, I don't know if this will do much to allay people's fears. I mean, the very real thing is that we are paying a lot more for goods than we were paying a few years ago. And I think people still very much feel that. But I think, the evidence is what it is and people's perceptions of what that evidence is what it is. And those things don't often meet. But I do think it at least should bolster public confidence a little bit for people to start making those purchases again. I mean, that's ultimately what this economy has been missing is people buying homes and doing other things. Now, will those interest rates go down probably to the levels they were pre this period? Probably not. But I do think it looks like at least people are stepping out a bit more and willing to commit their dollars in ways they weren't a few months ago, So that seems to confirm this idea that this evidence, right, that the recession that people had forecasted, this sort of doom and gloom, is actually not happening.
But see, here's the thing for me, Rebecca, that drives me crazy. They kept pounding this. And so what happened? People were actually believing it. And so it was in every news story. It was on all the business channels, all the cable news channels, the broadcast channels. So folks started freaking out. And so again, companies started cutting, laying off people. Beginning of the year, all the tech companies. In fact, in the media business, more jobs have been lost this year than media jobs lost during COVID. And so they were scaring the hell out of people. And now we see they're now saying, no big deal, no recession. And to Niambi's point, here's the deal. We've really been living a lie for the past almost 15 years. Remember, interest rates were cut big time after the housing crisis in 2008. This is 2023. Anybody with any sense should know we were not going to be sitting there at barely, 1% or under 1% interest rate for all of these years. And so at some point it was going to have to go up.
This is where financial literacy matters. And in this country, financial literacy is not taught at any level. You have to go out of your way to understand how this economy works and how finances work. Even if by the classical definition of a recession, I think it was like 2 months of retraction in the market by over 20% or whatever. I'm not an economist. I don't know that off the top of my head. However, just because we don't meet the classical definition doesn't mean that inflation isn't happening. We know that during the pandemic, there was excess dollars that were printed that was injected into the economy to actually stimulate the economy and get people to spend more in the economy. So we didn't go into a recession during the pandemic. But we do know that when you print more dollar bills, inflation happens. The other thing that we know is that the credit markets are tightening. The standards in order to get a housing loan, the standards in order to get a business loan has tightened up. So this is the only advice I would tell everybody. If you don't need to get a new car this year, don't get a new car. If you need to purchase another vehicle for you or your family, consider getting something used. Right now is the time to save, to educate yourself about the economy, about personal finances. It's not the time to buy just those big ticket items right now. There is something going on, even if we don't meet the classical definition of recession.
Well, here's the deal at Niambi. That's what's happening. The reality is, and we've done this on the show before, and that is in the last decade, fewer houses were built in the last decade since the 1930s. So part of the problem with that housing crisis with 2008. From 2010 to 2020, number of houses built were way below what we needed. We're now in a massive housing shortage. You also have private equity who've been buying up a lot of those homes, those so-called toxic assets, and now they're forcing people to pay higher rents. But two, and this is where the Biden administration should be pounding this home every day. They should be blasting all of these companies, because you mentioned rising prices. The rising prices, which is why inflation was high, is because these companies were price gouging. They were all talking about, record earnings. And so they were jacking up the prices unnecessarily. The supply side, in terms of that shortage of goods, has actually leveled off. We're now getting out of that. If prices are still high, it has nothing to do with shortages. It has to do with corporate greed.
Well, and I think we're seeing this across industries. I mean, right now there's a writers and actors strike, right? And that's also about these studios doing the same thing and trying to, line their pockets while, undercutting everyone else. And I think you talked about everyone from gas to airlines. We're actually making money at this moment when they were saying that things were really awful and really terrible. But what we found is that they were actually paying themselves more and passing the cost off to us, while also shortchanging their employees. So I think this whole model that we have of sort of just grab everything you can, right? That's sort of what capitalism incentivizes, is really gross and creates really perverse incentives. And we see it right now with this market. We saw it in the economic downturn in the early aughts. And we see like wisps of it again, but reining in corporate greed, I think, is really going to be central here, because it's not that people don't have money. It's not that people aren't buying things. It's not that people don't want to participate in the market. It's that these companies recognize that they could actually bilk people for more and provide less, including their employees. And that's what we're seeing over and over and over again. Everything from housing, again, to airlines, to cars, right? The value used to be in used cars, but now used cars cost as much as new cars. That something about this isn't tracking, right? And I think this is what you're pointing out, that something is rotten here. And I think we have to start holding these companies accountable for posting record earnings and paying their CEOs these exorbitant sums, and then saying, but we lack. We clearly don't.
Absolutely. And on the election side, Rebecca, again, this should bode very well for Biden and Harris. They talk about Bidenomics. Republicans hate that. But it's a little hard for them to say it's not working. We're seeing manufacturing increase in Georgia, in Arizona. We're seeing, again, stock market still where it is. We're seeing jobs being created. So all of the doom and gloom from Republicans has not transpired. And it's a little hard for them to say, oh, the economy sucks. Every indicator says they're wrong.
Right. If we're going by the definition of whether or not the economy is strong or not, the definitions is showing that, yes, the economy is strong. I think where the Republicans are making their argument is about personal economy, about the kitchen table talk. Is it harder for you, are you to get the same bag of groceries? Does it cost the same, or does it cost double now? I think that's where Republicans are talking, while Democrats are talking about the economy in the classical sense, in the large macro sense. But look, next year, people are going to be thinking about their pocketbooks and their wallets. They're going to try to figure out, can I use the same $50 to fill up my gas tank? When 10 years ago, it didn't cost $50 to fill up the average gas tank. How much is it going to cost for me to get a gallon of milk, get some bread, get some butter, get some eggs? A year ago, eggs for a dozen in certain areas was going up between $6 to $10. Those types of things are not very tenable for a family trying to make it. So I think there's two different conversations going on. One is about the macro economy when we think of the U.S. economy, and the other is about personal economy.
And remember, details don't always help folks. Remember, there were 100,000 chickens that died in a fire in January. That's one reason why the egg prices skyrocketed. Details absolutely matter.